you go. Matt, over to you. Is it? Oh, is it not? Oh, it is on there, sorry.
I'll do something, we'll work it out. Hello, thank you very much for having me. About 10 years ago, I was in this room as an undergraduate studying my module in biology and society, which I found really tedious at the time. And it's now very ironic that I work in public engagement with biology. So it's kind of taken over my life. But you'll either be very pleased or very disappointed to know that my slideshow contains no graphs, no maps, and no tables. So you're welcome or sorry, either way. I think for this audience, it's probably more sorry. My name's Matt, and I work for, as Joe said, the Bristol Natural History Consortium. Does that work? Yes. And the consortium takes a little while to explain, so I won't go through it all, but essentially we're a charitable partnership of these 14 organisations, and we have the charitable aim of engaging people with the natural world. And we do that through a number of projects. These are our three kind of key areas. We run the Festival of Nature. It's the UK's largest free celebration of the natural world. Lots and lots of activity around that in the summer. Communicate, which happened a couple of weeks ago, which is our kind of professional-facing conference and activities for professional communities in talking to people about nature and communication. And then the thing that occupies most of my time and is the kind of reason why I get to come and join in with this community is BioBlitz, which many of you I'm sure will have heard of, and probably no one needs a full explanation of what it is. But the shorthand I always say is 24 hours to find as much wildlife as you can. Go! And so through BioBlitz, what we really want to achieve, so what our role in BioBlitz is we don't own it, we don't own the brand. It is a totally open source idea. And essentially we sit in the middle and coordinate a bit of a national network supporting anyone who wants to run a BioBlitz. It's completely unfunded at the moment. It's essentially I'm around and any time that I can spare from the other things that I'm doing, I will put into BioBlitz, and we try and attach various projects through to help develop as much as we can. And doing that working with a lot of people in the room as well. Basic idea of a BioBlitz is, this is one of my favourite photos from a BioBlitz. This is Jeff, who's a technician at University of the West of England, but is also an amateur entomologist, and is creating moments like this where this little girl joined us for a BioBlitz in Albury Court. I think this is 2015, which is in East Bristol, and had a fantastic day. Was looking at all sorts of things, and I think the sort of looking at things closely, having those kind of moments that then inspire and engage people with the wildlife, which is local to them, is a really beautiful thing. So introducing people to wildlife and green space with these events and activities, introducing people to the idea of recording. This is actually a thing that people do. And further than that, sort of developing skills and knowledge, depending on who you're talking to, maybe go beyond sort of, look, this is a thing that people do, to here, look, here's how to do it. And of course, gathering some biological data in the process. And I like to think of it as very much a kind of breadth and depth approach. So in terms of breadth, this is doing BioBlitz at a music festival about quite a long time ago now, in 2012. And I like this photo because you can see in this kind of group of festival goers, there's the broad spectrum of every possible facial expression known to humanity. This is doing some Longworth trapping, so there is, I think, a wood mouse in here, and you've got some people who are very intrigued, some people who are very scared. That guy looks like he could be on the door at Walkabout. And there's I think someone just out of shot who's fallen off the air is actually running away. So there's looking at the breadth of how people react to wildlife kind of gives you an indication of how not everyone is like us in the room that kind of wants to get involved and intrigued up close. There's a wide range out there. And so if you can find ways to get lots of people from broad, different outlooks on nature to take part in a small way, then you can also find people who you can go a lot deeper with and identify those people who you can engage and can become the next round of recorders. So this is a group called Bristol Nature Network, who are a group of volunteers who came out of the bioblitzes that we run locally in the west of England. And these are all 18 to 30s groups. And this is where, after a bioblitz, they've then gone on with Joe from the Woodland Trust to go and do a training course in winter tree ID. So taking that initial engagement from a bioblitz event and going to do something much more in depth. But one of the questions that I always get asked at a bioblitz, and it's really interesting to see what the kind of the current narratives are, is where does this data go? Is it useful? We're collecting all this information as part of this event. Where does it go? What happens to it? And that's the point where an awful lot of what we've been talking about in terms of data pathways and verifications is a very difficult thing to explain, as I'm sure you can imagine. And what we did was we asked a lot of you guys and a lot of people working in the recording sector, what do you say when people ask you this question? And it was really interesting to see there were kind of 4 different ways that people answered it. There was kind of very confident, yes, all of this data is useful that you give us, very, very useful, so please give us more. That's great, that gives you a very positive outlook. That means that people want to give data. It's like, yes, brilliant, what I give you is useful, so I want to keep giving it. But that may well be undermined as a narrative if then that person looks for that data somewhere and goes, but it hasn't, where's my data point on the map? Because it's been taken out by a data cleaner or something like that. You don't have more sort of tentative narratives. Well, it depends. And that gives a bit more of a robust and accurate representation of all the caveats and context and things that we've been talking about, but it kind of can, in that kind of new person's mind, downplays the value of recording. Oh, well, if it's not going to be useful, then why would I bother? Then you've also got these kind of very detailed narratives. Well, it could go through iRecord and go through this process. It could go to local record centre and go through this process. It could go to the NBN in that process, or GBIF, or any of these other sorts of things. If you give all of those options, then there's that kind of bewilderment look that you start to get from people when you're standing in front of them. Or you can simplify, take it right down to the bare bones. They go somewhere, and that's great. And that's all you need to know. But those narratives might well be able to be understood and engaged with quickly, but that only really works if you are only working in one data pathway. If you are solely promoting, right, well, you send them to this place, and that's it. And so it doesn't really capture the nuance. So we identified a bit of a need around a kind of more cohesive communications around the data management model. There's so much to be said that quite often it seems like a kind of barrier to anyone wanting to get involved, and it's probably a little bit confusing for people around the room as well, as sort of within the sector, and recorders, and whether you're a recorder or whether you're an organiser, as Mark was saying, it's kind of all a bit bewildering, really. And actually the fact that we take so much time out of this conference to talk about it in depth, and as someone who is not, I'm not from a record centre, I haven't got that experience, as someone who's slightly outside of that world with just one foot into it, it's really hard to follow, guys. It really is. So the idea of pulling some of this together is for a more cohesive communications around data management and quality, and we're looking at trying to put that within this landscape of communication that we present out to the wider world. We've got conflicting narratives. Your data should go here. Well, actually, it would be better if it went here. Well, actually, it would be better if it went here. There's this idea of recorder identity, which came out really strongly in the consultation that we did, that was a recorder will feel like my records go to this society. I am a recorder for this group. And it's a very, very important part of the motivation for people getting involved. So how do you affect recorders' behavior to get them to do something that's perhaps better for the data if it's a core part of them? The way that they do record is a core part of what they do, of their motivation for recording. And then we've got multiple platforms as well. There's lots of different apps that work in different ways with the verification systems and the data pathways. So what's best, how to do that? So not too much to try and sort out, really, in a small project and a small sort of part-time way. So what we do is we looked back at some of the guidance that us and partners from Natural History Museum, the University of York and Marine Biological Association put together quite a long time ago in the first instance, about 2010, and this is the kind of second version that we did a couple of years ago, and thought, well, we need to kind of supplement this. This is all about how to run a BioBlitz event. But actually, how do we tell the story of where the data goes afterwards? So we put together a second publication in March this year that was a toolkit for people who need to communicate with people about records. So not just at a BioBlitz, that's kind of obviously influenced our thinking around it, but it gives you some sort of communication principles that come from the background of the public engagement world and sort of are there to help. And what I'd like you to do is, I'd like to actually, given that we're back in one of my old university lecture venues, I kind of wanted to go back to school a little bit. And partly because of that, and partly because I really want to steal the format that the NBN team used yesterday, but I'm less well prepared for it. So, if you have a notebook, and are willing to sacrifice a page from it, I'm really keen to get your feedback and your ideas on some of what I'm about to go through. So if you can write down any notes that you would like to make in what you think of some of the stuff from this toolkit. This toolkit was put together in consultation. A lot of you will have fed into the little online form that we sent around back in February to tell us what you thought should go in it. So I'm really keen to see if you still think that now that it's been done. And then if you jot anything down on a piece of paper, rip it out and leave it somewhere, maybe on the stage would be useful, or if I can put some NBN team members on the spot to grab them off you as you go by the door, that would be brilliant. I think some of you might have been worried that when I said I was taking you back to my university days that I was going to take you down Caroline Street for a bag of chips at a fight, but don't worry, well, if you like. All of this stuff, by the way, is available at bioblitzuk.org.uk if you want to find any of it. But just going through some of the basic principles that came out of this. We started with some very basic rules of engagement from public perception. Keep it simple. The more complicated and launching into detail, it's very easy to want to go straight into lots of detail about something, but that can be really bewildering for someone who's not already up to speed with what you're doing. Staying positive. There's a lot going around at the moment, particularly around everyone's seen about conservation optimism. Really, really important ideas and relate back to some of what Mark was saying as well, of negative stories kind of breed negativity. And there's some really interesting psychology behind all of that. It's not just because kind of we want to feel better about it. It actually it does encourage people to take part. Encouraging people not enforcing. So part of if we give people stringent rules, actually tend to create rebels by doing that. People will sort of say, well, I don't want to follow your rules. I'll go off and do my own thing. Showing, don't tell. This is all the kinds of things that BioBlitz is brilliant for, because you can have things in pots and look at them really closely. And sharing stories, I think, also came up yesterday about how do we use some of this data to then tell great stories about the wildlife that's around people. And that's the kind of thing that will really capture people's imagination. Reframing the story as well, I think particularly around recording, we have a kind of tendency to launch into, well, this is what recording involves, and this is what you have to do. And actually, it's kind of a bit, you kind of need to break it down to be a little bit more simple. Look at what we do. Here it is. This is a thing. You can do it too, as well. You know, you can take part, and giving people the confidence, not knocking them back with, oh, but that piece of data actually probably won't be very useful. It's kind of, how do you make that piece of data useful, rather than knocking people back. And look at the value, and that's where the stories come in, using data to showcase. Look, data comes in, it doesn't just disappear into a vault somewhere, we can actually tell you things with it. Belonging, I think, is a big part, and I would imagine that it's a big part of the motivation why a lot of people in the room are recorders. There's a sense of community about it, a sense of belonging, and that comes back as well to that recorder identity idea. It's like, I feel like I'm part of the Earthworm Society, and that's where my records go, and that's where my allegiances lie. Or I feel like I am a part of the iRecord community, and that's where I like my records to go, because I feel like I'm linked up with people all over the country online. And then really key principle of that kind of how. Here are the tools. Don't just say, you want to go, do biological recording because you darn well should. Here's how to do it. And so that took us to an idea of how do we reframe this story, how do we bring this all together into helping people talk about biological recording in a useful way. And so we basically asked ourselves this question: what type of recorder could you be? Whether this is for an existing recorder who wants to do more, or whether this is for people brand new to recording, it's kind of saying, well, if you want to do X type of recording, what information do you need? So we came up with a few profiles, and these were fairly generic, and you may see yourself in some of these profiles, or you may think that we've completely missed you out, which I would love to know. Please write on your piece of paper. And so we put together, these are the actual pages of the toolkit. This is the first one. So the first one, the easiest one to sort of do a demonstration of is the specialist. So specialists primarily interested in one or two different taxonomic groups, keen on building up their knowledge and ID skills, and could be anywhere along their learning journey. So they could be a complete beginner, but they're really interested in one thing. Or they could be have specialized over a long time. And so we thought, well, what information do these people need? They need to know where they can go and find their community. They can find their community of fellow specialists in their particular thing. So there are great, like the UK hoverflies have a great Facebook group, for example. The special interest groups in local nature societies might be a good place to go. There's the Natural History Museum have a big list of those on their website. So, we've got all of these different places that people can go to as a specialist. And then they need to know, for the data pathway, what's the most sensible data pathway? What data pathway will make the most sense to them? If you're a specialist, then maybe that could be the National Recording Scheme. Thank you very much. And they might well need to know where to go to find those. So we did these for a few people. We did specialists, we did local people, so that was kind of pointing people more towards local record centre type model. The pan-species listers, doing that sort of online community as well. Generalists, if you just want to kind of record anything you find, then where do you go? Can you get involved in BioBlitz events, for example? And then the newbie, which is kind of where my level of interest comes in at BioBlitz, is how do we find new people who, this is their first entrance into recording. And we did some frequently asked questions, and again, this is kind of what, if people ask you this about recording, or say this about recording, then this is where you can find some of these questions. What if people, sorry, I'm no expert, something that you hear all the time at BioBlitz events. So there's no shame in that. We're all learning. We're all just at different stages, and there's lots of support out there and showing people how to find it. So 4 on your bits of paper, these are the kind of 3 questions that I really wanted to find out. And there is an online version of this, so you can fill it in online if you wish, but I don't expect you necessarily to be able to note down that URL at the bottom. But these are the kind of 3 things that if you can think about and grab me afterwards, I don't think we're going to have much time for questions, but if you grab me afterwards, I'm here all day and I'm very happy to sound off about all of this stuff. But what's jumped out as most useful, interesting? What kind of things are missing and what kind of positive outcomes? How can you see this helping in your work? Or will it be completely unhelpful, in which case that would be useful to know as well? That is actually the end of my little bit there. And do we have any time for questions? Or very quickly then, if you want to talk to me about this, come and grab me. New thing for 2018. Thank you very much.